On through the Sermon on the Mount, and again, that's page 685 in your pew Bibles. I'm sure everyone's excited and just been waiting to get to this one. But we will work through it with love and grace and gentleness. But as we get started, I would like to ask a question. Any guess on what the most popular Bible verse is in the entire world? All right, John 3:16. Any other guesses? Matthew 7:1. Nice. Anybody else? We don't get to do a lot of participation on Sunday morning, so here's your chance. Just shout it out. Psalm 23, that's one of them. This side of the room. Yeah. The Lord's Prayer, maybe? All right, well, just like anything, if you try to research, you get 50 different answers. And everyone has a different way of measuring this. So I figured to try to find a standard way of measuring it is by internet searches. So the most searched Bible verse in the entire world is John 3:16, which is searched over 2.1 million times a month. Then there is Jeremiah 29:11 and Philippians 4:13, those very popular coffee mug verses with 82,000 searches per month, and Proverbs 3:5 with 58,000 a month, and then Psalm 23 was there with around 40-something thousand verses a month. But I have, over the years, conducted a rather unscientific study, and the verse that I hear quoted most often is Matthew 7:1 by a lot of people. I hear this verse quoted and referenced all the time, whether it be in conversation, whether it be through over the radio, media, movies, things like that. And it's actually, there's research out there that this is one of the most referenced verses by non-believers. People who claim to not be Christians use Matthew 7:1 quite often. And why do you think this is? It's because people do not want to be judged, right? So they say, doesn't the Bible say, do not judge? And it's one of those that's so popular that they actually repeat it in the old King James. Judge not, lest ye be judged. But who can blame them, right? I mean, raise your hand if you like being judged. Yeah, didn't think so. But as we move forward in the Sermon on the Mount, we need to remember a few things. That the Sermon on the Mount is Jesus' way of communicating to us his kingdom ethic. And these things that he's teaching us are to be the way in which that we relate to each other and the way that we think about each other. And the verse that's kind of at the cornerstone, or I should say at the center of the Sermon on the Mount, is the greatest commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and all your strength. The second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. And as we move into chapter 7 and we talk about judgment and we talk about this really famous parable about the speck and the log in the eye, let us remember where we're grounded at here, that the Sermon on the Mount is all about the kingdom ethic and how we relate to each other, how we treat each other, how we glorify God by being salt and light in the earth. And our job is to be that salt which preserves things instead of acting in sinful ways that cause things to decay. such as relationships. So we're going to read Matthew 7, 1 through 6 one more time, and then we'll get into it. So Jesus says, "Judge not, that you be not judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." Think scale. The scale that you use will be used on you. Why do you see the speck in your brother's eye, but you do not notice the log in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, "Let me take the speck out of your eye," when there is a log in your own eye? You hypocrite! First, take the log out of your own eye, then you'll see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Verse 6, "Do not give dogs what is holy. Do not throw your pearls before pigs, lest they be trampled underfoot and turn to attack you." Like I said a few minutes ago, this verse is one that people love because as humans, we don't like being judged. But I also think it's pretty popular because it's widely misunderstood. You see, with this first verse, when Jesus says, "Judge not, or else you will be judged," he says he's not putting the kibosh on all types of judgment. That's the way we like to use this here. Someone makes a judgment, and we say, Jesus says, don't judge. Jesus is not putting an end to all types of judgment, but he's wanting to put an end to all types of unfair, harsh, and self-promoting judgments. He says, "Judge not, that you be not judged." One thing that this is not, it is not a call to be morally neutral all the time. It's not a call for us to be Switzerland. It is a call for us to be wise. See, the Greek word here that's used for judge in the New Testament has two meanings, very much like it does in English. And the first meaning is discernment, as in discerning between two things. So personally, I really enjoy classic cars. I don't get the chance to own one yet, but hopefully one day I hope to. Maybe if I sell my motorcycle. But once a year here at Fowler Center, we have a car show and an antique tractor show. And when you go to a car show, there's beautiful cars lined up. People have put hours into detailing them. And there's judges there, right? And they walk around and they look at the cars and they make judgments on the cars and they pick a winner. We've all seen the TV shows out there like America's Got Talent, American Idol, Dancing with the Stars. I've never seen The Masked Singer, but it looks really ridiculous. I'm sorry if I've offended anybody who watches it. We even see judges during the Olympics. There's Olympic diving. There's Olympic gymnastics. And even in boxing, there's judges there to watch the performance, to discern what's going on, and to choose the best performance. One of the most painful opportunities to discern in our lives is when we're in the drive-thru at Burger King or McDonald's, and you can barely read the sign, and there's all these overwhelming advertisements, and you don't know what you want, and there's people behind you, and then your spouse is in the car bothering you to hurry up. That's usually me bothering. And it's just like this intense situation. You have to discern, judge according to what's in front of you, what you would like to eat. That's one form of judgment that we're talking about here with this Greek word. Or one more we can do here today. Sometimes we take surveys, right? So I can do this. Yes, we are as young adults group and going to get ice cream afterwards, going to lickety split, right? Most people enjoy ice cream. Not everybody. But people who like ice cream, there's a very heated debate out there. Vanilla or chocolate. Right? Raise your hand if you're a chocolate fan over vanilla. Be proud. Raise them up high. Chocolate over vanilla. Okay. All right. How about vanilla over chocolate? All right. See, you all just judged something. You judged your favorite ice cream. So you discern. That is okay. So this is not the type of judgment that Jesus is forbidding. We know this because it just can't be true. If Jesus was telling us not to judge in this way, it would hamstring 90% of his teachings and the rest of the Bible itself. So what is Jesus talking about? We know that discerning between right and wrong is okay. The second meaning of this Greek word for judge means to condemn or to put yourself in a place of superiority over someone else, to put someone down in order to self-promote. Skye Jitani says this about the word judgment. He says, Jesus does not want us to condemn others. He does not want us to pass final judgment or declare another person to be permanently guilty. Such devaluing of a person is precisely what Jesus' enemies did to him. This is the way of Babylon. This is the way of the world, not the way of the kingdom. So this is the type of judgment that Jesus is calling us to avoid. Paul said a similar thing when writing to the church in Corinth in 1 Corinthians, when he was dealing with their sin of judgment. He said, "Therefore, do not pronounce judgment before the time, before the Lord comes, who will bring light to all the things now hidden in darkness, and will disclose the purpose of the heart. Then each one will receive his condemnation from God." It's 1 Corinthians 3:5. So now we know the difference. The type of judgment that we're allowed to use and the type of judgment that Jesus wants us to avoid. But what's he talking about in verse 2? He goes on to say, with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. You can also use the word balance or scale. With the scale you use to weigh other people, Jesus says that same scale will be used upon you. Here we have in mind the scale of God's judgment. Jesus is telling us to remember before we pass judgment on someone else that we too will one day stand before the throne of God to give an account for everything we have done. So, with what scale would you like to be weighed? The scale of mercy that is very forgiving, or the scale of justice that is very demanding? The scale of justice, which weighs each and every sinful thought, every word, and every action, and then brings proper punishment. Jesus is calling us here to consider the scale of our forgiveness and consider the scale of the forgiveness of the Heavenly Father before we judge our earthly brothers and sisters. So think about it like this. How do we talk about people? How do we trash talk other people? How do we judge them? How do we pick them apart when they're not around? Analyze them. Think about how harsh you've been. Let's think about how harsh we've been in analyzing and judging other people. And then turn that around and think, how will I stand up under such scrutiny, such judgment, such hard judgment? So, we're learning here that the Lord is not teaching us not to judge, period, but rather how to make true, wise, and most importantly, loving judgment. He is teaching us here what Douglas O'Donnell in his commentary calls the loving art of speck removal. The loving art of speck removal. Let's go on in our text in verse 3 through 5. And Jesus made his statement about judgment, how we're not to judge and how we will be judged or balanced or weighed with that same type of judgment that we give other people. And then, like the master teacher does, he gives us a parable to help us understand why or how this applies. Jesus says, "Why do you see the speck in your brother's eye, but don't notice the log that is in your eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me take that speck out of your eye,' when there is a log in your own eye?" Go to the next slide, please. Slide number 2. This is what it looks like. This is what Jesus is trying to get a picture in your mind. And that chuckling is exactly what he wanted. The first time Jesus said this, he wanted people to go, "A log? A beam in my eye? What are you talking about?" It's supposed to be absurd in order to get your attention. And this is what we're supposed to think. Why is it so easy for us as Christians to see other people's faults and not our own? Why are we so good at detecting other people's sin but not our own? Why are we so good at highlighting other people's sin and minimizing our own? You could say it's human nature, it's our sinful nature, but in the end, it really makes us feel a lot better about ourselves at the expense of somebody else. But one of the reasons we do this is because we're so blinded with the log in our eye. We're so blinded with our own self-righteousness that we can't see the truth, or we can't take advantage of an opportunity to show mercy, as mercy has been shown to us. It's kind of the point of Jesus' parable. He's using an absurd example to prove a point. I mean, look at this guy with the 2x6 or the beam in his eye. Can he see anything? Let alone be able to see a speck? Not at all. How about the lady with the tree growing out of her eye? Is she qualified to remove a splinter from the other lady's eye? No way. She can't even get close enough to touch her. See how absurd it is? Next slide, please. We think about the life of Jesus and what we learned during Easter time. Think about the Sanhedrin and the arrest and the crucifixion of Jesus. They could have arrested Jesus any day while he was teaching during the daytime, while he's teaching in the temple. Instead, they arrested him in the middle of the night, outside the public eye, and they put him through a fake trial with false witnesses. What did they do? They used their own power to promote and protect their own status, rather to seek justice and mercy. They were so blinded by their self-righteousness that they no longer could measure right from wrong. And that's what this mirror says. If you can't read it, it says, "Warning, your issues are larger than they appear." I've taken this picture from a book by the man I quoted, Skye Jatani. We've used it here before. It's called "What If Jesus Was Serious?" And it's all about the Sermon on the Mount. He says, "This is a warning to all of us who cling to our religious identity while judging the non-religious people around us. We become so convinced of our own righteousness We're so obsessed with the fact that we think we're so good that we fail to see our own duplicity. We fail to see our own sin. So he recommends, when you feel the impulse to judge someone, look in this mirror. Instead of judging them, pray to the Lord and ask Him to reveal the plank in our own eyes. He says it a lot more eloquent than me. I don't know if you saw the sign this week as you drove by. But the point of this is that we need to realize our own sin before we trash other people. Because when we trash other people, when we put them down, when we talk about them behind their backs, when we dishonor them, we're not only trashing our brothers and sisters, but we're trashing the image of God. No matter what we think of another person, they're all created in the image of God. And that brings dignity and that brings value. If you could go back to the slide number 2, please. We'll just keep that up there for a little bit. So we are called to judge, but to judge fairly and in true love, while understanding and realizing our own sin. That's why it's called the loving art of speck removal. It's an opportunity to not make ourselves look or feel better. It's not an opportunity to bring somebody down, but an opportunity to love somebody and to glorify God and to have their best interest at heart. And one thing that we like to do that doesn't qualify as being loving, if you're about to judge somebody, if we're about to talk about someone behind their back, if we're about to trash somebody, and we say, I know nobody's perfect, but, or you go to somebody and you want to just be like, tell them it like it is and how wrong they are and how sinful they are, and you say, I'm not perfect, I know, but, like, that doesn't count. Right? It doesn't just, it's not a blank statement that we can say and then just say whatever we want and it makes it okay. I'm pulled a lot from Douglas O'Donnell's commentary here with the loving art of speck removal. This is kind of how he tells us to go about it. He says, here's Jesus. He's making a really serious and funny illustration. Picture a guy over here who has a speck in his eye. He really does have a problem. He has something in his eye. You ever have something in your eye? It's not comfortable, right? It's a real problem. Jesus doesn't say, actually, this parable tells us indirectly that there is a problem here that needs to be dealt with. Jesus says don't avoid dealing with the problem. He just tells us the right way to go about doing it and the wrong way to go about doing it. So a speck in your eye is not easy to live with, especially if it's one of those bugs that get in your eye and it just burns. You want someone to remove it, right? You need some help. So here comes the help. Picture this. Here comes the dude with the log in his eye. And when Jesus says a log, the word here is more like beam. And the image that would come into the mind of the people that were listening to Jesus would have been a main beam that held up a house in the time of Jesus. A huge log that could have been up to 40 feet long and 5 feet around. So if we can picture somebody with a 40-foot log coming out of their face, their vision is severely compromised. They would be blind. So they can't see clearly enough to get around, let alone get close enough to properly and lovingly remove the speck, right? In order to remove something from somebody's eye, you need to be face to face. You need to have clear vision. So the point of the log analogy is don't be a hypocrite. However, being a hypocrite consists of more than meets the eye. Get it? Sorry. Most of us don't intentionally act like hypocrites, right? I mean, I don't wake up in the morning looking for opportunities to become a hypocrite. None of us do. But eventually, all of us do or say